I think she doesn't quite grasp the level of influence she has on musicians and artists, songwriters today. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be listening to an interview with Joni Mitchell done with Clive Davis, and it's a pretty rare interview for a Grammy party. And it was just done about a week ago or so, and it was only posted on Joni Mitchell's Instagram 12 hours ago. And I listened to it right away because I was pretty curious, but I'm going to be listening to it again. And for those who are new to my channel, I like to listen to interviews with musicians and songwriters, and I just sort of react to it to see if we can gain any insight into the music industry, into the songwriter's process, the creative process, and just any interesting tidbits of information, not necessarily songwriting related, but I tend to talk a little bit about the psychology behind songwriting and the creative insights that I might gain or some wisdom I might have to share. Just listening to other songwriters' interviews, I find that it's very fascinating to me. I chose Joni Mitchell because, well, she's one of the greatest female songwriters of all time, and Joni Mitchell has challenged the male-dominated music scene since the 70s. She was kind of a trailblazer of her time, and I think she's a trailblazer still for independent musicians. She inspires both men and women, and I think when her album came out in 1971, Rolling Stone actually cited it as the 30th greatest album of time, making it one of the top albums by women. With 19 studio albums achieved, Joni's musical career transcends gender, time, and even genre. I'm really interested in this only a 3-minute interview, but let's take a listen and see what we can gain from it. I'm just going to be listening and pausing here and then, and you guys can follow along to the interview, and I'll just talk a little bit about what I think and any of the insights we've gained.
You know, I worked as a waitress in a coffee house, and there were folk singers coming and going, and one night one of them called in sick or didn't show anyway, so they said, you know, look, we've got a blank evening, Joni, you're playing the ukulele, you know, will you go on? So I went on, but I was scared to death, you know. And then after that, I went to art college, and driving to my apartment, because I had a roommate, so I know where I was going, I passed a place called the Depression. And so I had the cab stop, and I went in, and I asked, you know, if I could perform there. And they had already hired a folk singer in residence, but he said yes, that he would hire me from time to time. And so that's when I really started performing, but I was still doing folk songs. And the other performer would say, you can't play that song and you can't play that song because those songs are mine in this territory.
So at that time, Joni Mitchell didn't really have a lot of name recognition. And another interesting thing about this time is that folk singers kind of had like a territory. And I think that they had like almost like exclusive rights to play certain songs, even if they weren't their songs. And so Joni kind of faced this sort of territorial songwriter's problem where she wanted to sing a song, but it was taken. So she was told, like, no, you can't sing that. That's my song.
And I found out the folk community was extremely territorial like that. And you go into town and they tell you, you can't play this, you can't play that. And I thought the only way around this dilemma is to begin to write your own songs.
She faced this sort of territorial songwriter's dilemma, and she thought, okay, I guess I have to write my own songs. So it's interesting to me because when I think of Joni Mitchell, I don't think, oh, she started writing songs because of the folk singer's territorial issues, but she was kind of forced to write her own songs. So that's interesting.
It was out of necessity that I began to write original material.
There was not a female singer, songwriter out there, and men too, that do not cite you as an important influence. So I'm going to ask you, have you ever been able to fully take in your influence on popular music and several generations of artists?
It's only recently that people have come forward and told me of, I was unaware, because all I was aware of was bad reviews, which I thought were, unjust and stupid, especially, like Dog Eat Dog got terrible.
Joni I think she doesn't quite grasp the level of influence she has on musicians and artists, songwriters today. I can't think of, when I look at some of my influences, they're citing Joni Mitchell as their influence, and she's one of my influences. So it's kind of like this, this unrelenting influence that she has on singer-songwriters today. But not just singer-songwriters, almost any artist, any music fan. Joni's kind of like canon. She's legendary. So it's interesting that she doesn't quite feel that appreciation that we might have for her. And I think it kind of makes me sad. But she says in this quote, "It seems to be another generation has grasped it. I mean, I drove to West LA and young boys, pre-teeners, were waving at me from the curb. I thought, oh my God, that's amazing." He said, "Why is it that all the young people over there know your music and the people our age don't? It's like this generation is ready for what I had to say, I guess, and is not so nervous about it." I think that's interesting because Joni's music is deeply personal and... Oh, Kitty's here. She's very silly. So Joni Mitchell's music is so deeply personal, and the lyrics are so precise, and they sort of express a lot of the emotions and the sadness and the trouble that many people experience. And so I think people nowadays are a bit more open to this notion of expressing yourself very personally. I think it was different for women too, because as a male singer-songwriter, it would sort of be applauded that if he was sort of sensitive and writing poetry and, writing about his personal life or sort of feelings. But as a woman, it's a lot harder, or especially back then, I think it was a lot harder to do that without getting sort of criticism that you're expressing maybe too much. Let's listen a little bit more.
Terrible reviews, and except in the black magazines. And, but I thought, why is it that people are so hard on this stuff? Well, I guess it's because it's different. It doesn't fit into a genre. You can't say it's folk music or jazz. It's somewhere in between. My name comes up in the Motown anthology. It says, "Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Joni Mitchell," this is when I was living in Detroit, "was making a new kind of folk music." So I guess I always thought that folk music wasn't a good title for me, except it was a girl with a guitar and therefore a folk singer, right? The only people that could play my music were jazz musicians, because it was so strange. And they could write it out and look at the strangeness and get in on it.
She talks about how jazz musicians were the only musicians who she feels could play her music because the chords were strange or the music was strange. What does she mean by that? She had a unique way of kind of not really inventing, but, sort of inventing her own chords. And I see this in a lot of singer-songwriters who've sort of become highly successful, highly famous. And I don't think it's because they're kind of doing strange chords that they're becoming successful. I think It's more that the way they approach the songwriting is with curiosity, really using the guitar and the instrument more in a playful way. It's hard to describe what I mean, but it's like not looking at it so scientifically and methodical, or like trying to fit into a certain genre, trying to fit in a box. You're just sort of like playing and matching the emotions and matching what you feel fits for the music and the lyrics without, being stuck to just basic standard tuning, for example. Another thing is that Joni had polio when she was younger, and so her left hand had been weakened, and she kind of invented her own way of playing chords so that she could play in a way that suited her sort of weakened hand. People would call her chords weird, so Joni Mitchell's weird chords. But in a quote, she says, "How can there be weird chords? Chords are depictions of emotions, these chords that I was getting by, twisting knobs on the guitar until I could get these chords that I heard inside that suited me. They feel like my feelings. I called them chords of inquiry. They have a question mark in them. There were so many unresolved things in me that those chords suited me." This quote's from an article from The Ringer, and it reminds me a little bit of an interview that I heard with Elliott Smith, where he talks about how he just sort of, invents chords, and people maybe call the chord strange, or the Elliott Smith chord, or, that kind of thing. There's sort of like this cult discussion about it in the music and songwriting world. I love that. I just love how in tune Joni is with her feelings, and how she can translate them onto the chords, onto the guitar. And it's like her own little language. And not only is it beautiful musically, but it's unique. It's sort of like a composition that she can only make. But the other thing that sort of stood out to me from this interview is how she doesn't quite feel accepted, even though she is one of the greatest songwriters of all time, and she's won different awards, and the Lifetime Achievement Award, Juno Awards, etc., etc. I think there's a certain sense for Joni that her music doesn't quite fit into a specific genre. It sort of transcends different genres, and she even mentions in this clip how, she doesn't quite feel like folk labels her music correctly. And not to compare, but it just reminded me of Elliott Smith, because he also has stated that his music isn't really folk music. Is it pop? What is it? It's just music. It doesn't necessarily need a label, but people like to label things. They like to put titles to things. But in another interview, Mitchell said she paid a big price for doing what she's done, because she was working in a genre that was not this, not that, and people didn't really know where to fit her in. And as a new musician, as a songwriter, that's really hard to kind of deal with, to kind of cope with, because it's kind of like, I think it feels like it doesn't matter how incredible your music is, how amazing it sounds, how unique and special the songwriting is, and how excellent it's produced. There's this sense that if it doesn't fit in, then it's not quite respected enough. It's not quite accepted. And I think that although being accepted isn't the point of making music, of making art, I think artists do want and deserve this feeling of recognition for their art. And it's really hard when you don't quite fit in into this or that category. I think Joni feels a little bit hurt. I just get that sense that, her music is her child, and there's this sort of sense like, I know my child is a little bit different, but please don't bully him, please don't make fun of him, you know, he's a good kid. It's really relatable as a songwriter myself. I get this feeling that it's so hard to fit in, and if I do try to fit in amongst my music peers, then am I selling out? Or like, how do you balance trying to make a successful record that actually sells or that people actually want to listen to, and making your own music? And I think I'm on the side that says you should just make your music, and if it's good, then people will listen, people will come, and you shouldn't try to fit in. And I think that there's merit to art, even if it's not quite accepted and doesn't quite fit into anything specific, and maybe people don't like what you're making right now, but maybe they'll like it in 10 years. You could be, you know, maybe you're inventing something new, you're speaking from your heart, your music's coming from your heart, and maybe it's not quite appreciated. But I just want to encourage you that it's okay. It's okay to not quite fit into a label, and if anything, it kind of shows that you've created something unique and your own, and keep going, keep writing the music anyway. So even with Joni Mitchell's album Blue, which was wildly successful, when it came out, people told her that it was too personal and that the lyrics were just too detailed and too much about her own life, and maybe that she should sort of save something for herself, you know, don't give away everything. And I feel like I hate this. I don't know what else to say. I just hate this notion that you need to save something for yourself, or like have this air of mystery. And something I read on an article was that Joni felt alienated from her male genius contemporaries. For example, like Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan, she even wrote a song called Talk to Me. It's basically about how Bob Dylan was too aloof to speak to Joni. And I find that frustrating. The lyrics of Talk to Me are, oh, I talk too loose. Again, I talk too open and free. I pay a high price for my open talking, like you do for your silent mystery. Come and talk to me. Please talk to me. So Bob Dylan had to be this like aloof, silent, mysterious man. And it was like part of his allure. But I think that this is silly. We don't need to be, you know, some mysterious artiste figure to be a musical genius or to be like a successful musician. I think we can share and we can express ourselves more precisely and more personally, and that there's nothing really wrong with that. I think that there's just this culture of shame and sort of taboo around expressing yourself, and especially as a woman, it's sort of seen as like crazy or like too much if you express too much. But I just don't agree. Just, yeah. Kind of what I take away from this interview is mainly the idea that she didn't feel like she doesn't feel like she really fits in. There's a lesson to be learned from that feeling of not really fitting in. I think we should just say, you know, screw it. Make your music, make your art, and I think it's worth it to do it and not try to fit in the process, you know? If it becomes successful, if it becomes famous, that's going to happen if the music is good. You know, people will hear it. But it's difficult, you know? I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we're never going to really feel like we fit in. If Joni Mitchell, who is, widely cited as one of the greatest female singer-songwriters of all time, and yet she still doesn't quite feel respected and feel 100% like she fits in and is appreciated, then no one's gonna feel fully appreciated. So I think we need to really improve the community aspect of music, and as artists build a kind of culture that is more loving and more like a warm bubble. I feel like, not to use the bubble term because it's kind of ruined by COVID social distancing bubbles, if you have those where you are, but I just want to see more positive community, and I want to see more love and respect for all musicians and songwriters from within the community itself, and less competition and more love. I just love Joni. She's so good. I'm Deanna Faye, singer-songwriter from Canada, and I make music, but I also make videos about songwriting, the creative process. Please hit the like, share, subscribe if you like this video, and cheers everyone. Take care.